Happy Thanksgiving! This is one of the most special days of the year, next to Christmas and New Year's Day and the 4th of July and Memorial Day and, well, another dozen or so special days. But it's the only day that is focused on being thankful. Well, yes, we are thankful for Jesus on Christmas, or should be, and thankful to have lived another year on New Year's, or should be, and thankful to live in the United States on the 4th of July, if we do. Wait, some of you don't live in the United States. Well, I'm sure you're grateful anyway. But Thanksgiving Day is a day to be grateful every November, except it's in October in Canada. Perhaps you have a special day for giving thanks at another time of the year. Well, you can always come back to this podcast on that day, I guess. In the United States, Thanksgiving is traditionally a day for stuffing yourself with turkey and stuffing, and mashed potatoes and gravy, and cranberry sauce, and a lot of other things as well. But where did it come from? I checked the Encyclopedia Britannica, and it summed everything up in one paragraph. It tells me that the Pilgrims invited neighboring Indians, now called Native Americans, to join them to celebrate for 3 days with recreation and eating. But who were the Pilgrims? They were the first permanent settlers in what is now the United States. They were also part of the English Separatist Church, a radical branch of Puritanism. That's what the Encyclopedia Britannica says, and they also got an entire paragraph on their name. Why were the the Native Americans invited? Because they gave helpful advice on growing crops to the Pilgrims and were instrumental in keeping the colonists alive that year. But the idea of Thanksgiving did not just come out of thin air, or even thick air. The idea came from the Bible, which the Puritans knew well, and apparently so did the English Separatist Church. You can find it described in Leviticus 23, verses 33 to 36, and lasting 7 days long. The first day involved a sacred assembly, and the 8th day also involved a sacred assembly with a food offering to God. Now that seems appropriate. In Deuteronomy 16:13, there's another description of the holidays, including the importance of having joy during the celebration. There is also the promise that God will bless the harvest and all the work done by hand. This will make the joy complete. By the time of Jesus, there was another tradition added to the celebration of this feast. On the last day of the celebration, a pitcher of water was brought into the temple and poured out as a prayer to God for rain. Indeed, the focus of the entire week had become, by that point, praying for rain. Now, this might seem a bit strange, as this celebration focuses upon the harvest that has just been completed. So why would they pray for rain? This was because the ground needed to be wet so they could plant seeds for the next year and therefore have a subsequent harvest. When the priest poured out the water in the temple, Jesus came forward and stated that the thirsty should come to him for a drink, and those that believed in Jesus would find rivers of living water flowing from them. John states in his gospel that this is a reference to the Holy Spirit, which would soon be poured out at Pentecost. See John chapter 7, verses 37 to 39, as well as Acts 2. Families told the story of their wandering in the wilderness as a result of disobeying God. At least they did in that first generation. He had told them to invade Canaan, but when the Israelites discovered the people there were powerful, they refused to obey God. Thus they were condemned to 40 years of wandering. But even more important was the story of how they got into the wilderness to begin with. They had been captives, slaves in Egypt for hundreds of years. Then God sent Moses to encourage the leader of Egypt to free them. He did this with a series of plagues that nearly destroyed the country. Each time the leader of Egypt, called Pharaoh, changed his mind, the plague was removed. Again, these stories were told over and over by parents to their children, that the kids began to think of themselves as having gone through the whole experience. Thus, when Moses gave his last message to his people, he spoke of all of them going through the plagues and wilderness wandering, even though most of the people of that first generation had already died. This says a lot for the power of storytelling, especially stories that the parents actually experienced. But to make sure they got the message, Jewish people began to make sukkah booths, little buildings usually made of branches and parts of trees, to remind them that they had had to live in the wilderness. Later, some of the sukkah booths included cloth fabric, as the original dwellings in the wilderness were no doubt tents. So the kids essentially got a first-hand experience, a bit like the Israelites at the beginning. The difference was that while the Jewish people of later times ate a meal or two in the sukkah booth and were expected to sleep in it at least one night, it was a full-time experience when they were actually in the wilderness. They didn't want to frustrate the kids by the experience, just give them a taste of it. Now, how does this relate to Thanksgiving? Apparently, the Pilgrims adapted the Feast of Tabernacles as the model they used to celebrate Thanksgiving. The differences were minimal, but should be noted. The Pilgrims celebrated for 3 days, while in the Bible the celebration is for 7 days. 8 if you count the final assembly. Today we celebrate Thanksgiving on a single day, but then have turkey sandwiches for 3 days, or perhaps all 7 days or more. Since the early Pilgrims shared their time with the Native Americans, either or both may have lived in tents or roughly made structures, perhaps like the sukkah booths. The fact that it was a month or more late seems of little significance. The Bible speaks of this group of holidays being celebrated at other times. For example, in Nehemiah 8, it speaks of celebrating the holidays at the beginning of the month, while Leviticus states that it's in the middle of the month. Nehemiah also mentions the building of sukkah booths, while this is not mentioned earlier. There is also the possibility that Jesus was born during this important feast. While this is not a certainty, the Bible does speak of Jesus tabernacling with us. That's a very important word, tabernacling with us. This may be a hint of when he was born. This fits with the accounts of Jesus being announced to the shepherds who were looking after their sheep in the open fields, which means it was probably one of the warmer months of the year. Certainly October is warmer than December. In December, it's more likely the shepherds would keep the sheep together, so their body heat could be shared. So, just in case Jesus was born at the Feast of Tabernacles, you might want to say, "Happy birthday, Jesus," during the Thanksgiving time. There is one other connection you can make to American history from the Feast of Tabernacles. In the late 1800s, there was the birth of the camp meeting, where people would get together for a week to 10 days and have a series of meetings. People would receive salvation, grow in the Lord, and be called to Christian service, such as pastoring or becoming a missionary. The main building was usually called the tabernacle. Now that sounds like something directly from the scripture. And those tabernacles were often made of rough-cut lumber. The benches were often made of wood, and the floor was sawdust. Back then they spoke of hitting the sawdust trail, which meant the person was coming forward to receive something from the Lord. During those days of camp meeting, children often had special services, and it was thought that going to all the church services of the day, often 4 of them, one in the early morning, a second in the late morning, a third in the afternoon, and the largest being in the evening. So the kids might have alternate services in the afternoon. I recall that in the morning we had choir practice for the kids, and the afternoon involved some sports activities. But each camp had its own way of doing things. Camp meeting was a time of reflection upon your spiritual life and seeking God for a deeper life. People sometimes lived in small buildings that were rougher in their framework. It used to be that people lived in tents on the campground, and even the tabernacle might be a large tent, as it was in the Bible. The days of retreat and renewal were times that people anticipated. It was a time of rededication to one's commitment to the Lord. This emphasis might be mentioned in your time of giving thanks to God for providing for you during this year, that we make certain that we are right with God and living for Him completely. That might be a nice addition to your Thanksgiving meal. So this is Thanksgiving. There must be quite a few passages of the Bible with that word, right? Well, there are several, although the Passion Translation only lists one that I can find. But the idea of being thankful is found many, many times in the Bible. While not everyone includes the idea of giving thanks to God as part of the holiday, it certainly originated with that, and certainly the Feast of Tabernacles includes that as well. So, happy Thanksgiving! It is good to give thanks to the Lord. We like to picture Thanksgiving in glowing ways. It's friends, family, and food. And I'm grateful that that is true for many of us. But it's also true that for a few of us, it's a painful time, and the main hope is that they will get through it. We want to talk with one person for whom Thanksgiving is difficult. Now, why are we doing this? Because we need to pray for him, and we need to reach out to those near us for whom Thanksgiving is a struggle. I'd like to introduce you to my friend, John.
Good morning.
Hi, John. How are you doing?
Doing good.
Great. Is this a good time to talk, or is this not so good?
This is good until I get to a truck stop.
Okay.
Preferably one with tire services, but what's up?
Well, I just wanted to know if you would have time to talk about maybe some favorite Thanksgivings that you've had. I have
Yes.
been asked to do a program on Thanksgiving, and I thought, well, I first of all thought of 2 or 3 people, and one of them being you, that might just have some good memories to share, and or maybe some struggles at Thanksgiving too. That would fit as well.
Yeah, and I think one goes with the other. Especially, I would say 12 years ago. I think that was the year after my Aunt Mim died.
Mm-hmm.
And the year before my mother died. I went to my cousins like we do every year. And ended up sitting down and talking with a distant nephew who wanted to know everything I knew about fishing and hunting. I knew nothing about hunting, except I had been bear hunting earlier that year, and or wanted to know all about it.
Huh.
And it felt good to be able to talk to him because, it was my cousin's husband's brother's kid. So it's not like exactly, has no interest in his kids whatsoever. No. For him, the life is sitting in front of the TV and gelling,
Oh, boy.
And never took his kids fishing, never took his kids hunting. And I even offered, I said, why don't we all get together and, do a family day or something like that? Right. Oh, no, I'm not much of one for the outdoors. Huh. That's the answer I got. Wow. So, anyway, I got to sit, and they actually live on a lake, so we went out and we fished off the dock, and that was a very special Thanksgiving.
Huh.
The sad thing, the struggle, was my mom wasn't there because she was sick. Mom had been drinking very heavily, and her liver was failing.
Oh, my.
And we didn't know to what extent. We just thought she couldn't keep food down, so she avoided Thanksgiving that year.
Huh. Wow.
So, yeah, all told, it was one of the most memorable. I remember it got so cold just after dinner that we ended up just all sitting in front of the television watching the pumpkin toss.
Huh. Wow.
Yeah, and to go outside of that, we would have to go way back into my youth, but I could completely recall Christmas Eves.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can remember every Christmas Eve, not necessarily every Thanksgiving.
Right. Did you have traditions for Thanksgiving? Certain things that were a must?
I wouldn't say that necessarily. We're a traditional family, and from a family of traditional families, so it was always the same stuff, turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, gravy, succotash. Oh, I do remember one more Thanksgiving that was even bigger than that. Back in 2004, I had a run to California, and my Aunt Karen lives in San Diego, and she drove up to L.A. to pick me up at my truck, and I went and stayed the whole weekend down there and cooked Thanksgiving. My sister and her husband were there, and my Aunt Karen wanted all the traditional stuff, the turkey, the mashed potatoes, the stuffing, the succotash. But what we ended up doing different is I made my own recipe for stuffing that involved grapes as well as chunks of turkey in it, and no oysters.
Oh.
And that was a blessing to be able to spend that with my aunt. And my aunt, who would normally have no Thanksgiving, and my sisters and brother-in-law, who really had no actual traditions outside of a bar room.
Oh. Wow.
So that was a very blessed Thanksgiving. Yeah. But no, you get outside of that, I really don't have many. Usually Thanksgiving was more of a contentious holiday for me. I had an Aunt Mim who she died at 98 years old.
Uh-huh.
And she never ceased to remind me how fat I was getting when I was eating my Thanksgiving dinner.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy.
But traditionally, Aunt Mim said the prayer, and Aunt Mim was what they call an I-amist cult member. And I-amists combine Christianity, Wiccanism, and faith in the United States Republican government. And it's all upside down, and she always said the prayer, and nobody could follow it, so we were guessing God could. She was our official family pastor, I guess you would say. And she made sure she was so.
Yeah.
But Yeah, usually Thanksgiving was a rough one for me, and a lot of that does revolve around that being extended family, and when I was younger, it was always mom warning me not to talk about opera, or people will think I'm gay, not to talk about classical musical. People will think I'm gay, not to talk about my friends, or people will know I'm gay, not to talk. So it's
Oh boy.
like
Wow.
I would end up at a Thanksgiving and just be kind of upside down. And now it's even more so because being on the registry, I've been banished from the family for Thanksgiving for the last 7 years.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
This year I will spend it with my dad and stepmom.
Oh.
I'm sorry I couldn't really give you more information than that.
No, you're giving us an insight into the way things are, and that's the important thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be all cheerful and happy, because it's not always a cheerful, happy time.
It's like I say, I can recall almost every Christmas as a youth, especially fond memories of those when all of my grandparents were alive.
Right.
But they all died when I was 7.
Wow.
So up until, but even past then, I can remember, a Christmas in jail. I can remember a Christmas on the road. I can remember, I can remember the year that my mom, the Christmas just before Mom died. And I can remember the one just after. And, yeah, there's many, many different feelings that are associated with that.
Yeah.
So, but for the most part, Christmas has always been a joyful time for me.
Yeah.
And I just got word from my lawyer that I will be home this Christmas.
Oh,
my trial was postponed till January 10th, and he said it'll be postponed again.
Well, what do you do to kind of deal with these negative things when it's a holiday where so many people are happy and eating a lot and really enjoying their families? How do you deal with that?
Well, a couple years ago, I went to Thanksgiving with some friends.
Uh-huh.
I could just show up at my cousin's place anytime I wanted to, but I just don't because my family's not there,
Right.
Generally, and I got friends. I could just show up at their place any old time I wanted to.
All right.
Generally, I just treat it as another day. Yeah, it hurts, and usually I shed a tear or two.
Yeah.
The following morning when I put my tree up.
Right.
Because I mean, my own standard tradition being, living alone now, I do not eat any kind of Christmas food until the day after Thanksgiving.
Uh-huh.
I don't listen to Christmas music until the day after Thanksgiving, and I do put my tree up the day after Thanksgiving. So, so I set my own level of normal, I guess, if you want to say it that way, create my own normal. And it's like I would tell absolutely anybody on the registry, if you don't like what you're living through, change the narrative.
Right.
Stop worrying about what I don't have and start being grateful for the things I do have. That's what Thanksgiving was all about, right?
Right.
I'm out of jail. I've got a roof over my head. I've got friends that I could be a part of. And my family's still my family. They're just on, the call has been temporarily disconnected.
Yeah.
That's how you look at it, or how I look at it. I mean, I could sit and beat myself up over it. I could, and I deserve that. I could sit and be unhappy. I deserve that. I mean, all these things I have the right to be, but then you turn it around and it's like, but I also have the right to be grateful. I deserve to be grateful for the things I've got. And I view, Thanksgiving weekend as an extended day, an extended, time off from work.
Right.
And there's nothing more joyful than a day at home.
There you go.
A pizza sitting on my belly with a can of pop and a movie on the TV. It just, that's life right there. I take a lot of lessons from President Clinton. Our economy and everything else wasn't really that good, but he told us it was, and we wanted to believe him. So we made the best of them, and darned if we didn't artificially make things work.
Yeah.
So, yeah, things will get better, and that has to be the narrative.
Right.
Because if I count on things not being good, then that crushes me. That crushes the spirit.
Right.
Yeah, it's one day at a time. I mean, it's, I would think if we take a look at our time that we spend, incarcerated or dealing with incarceration or dealing through our cases and everything else we've dealt with in life, through every rough turn, we just took it one step at a time. And, I'm the type of person, I go into my lawyer's office and I have a dozen things I want to take care of at once. And it's like he said, we're not dealing with this. We're not dealing with this. We're not dealing with this. This is our topic today, And then you start asking all kinds of other questions, and that has nothing to do with what we're talking about, John. Focus,
Yeah.
So that's what I would say is focus. Focus on the here and now, and make this minute the best you can, and the next minute falls into play.
Pray for John and all the difficulties that he faces. But we all have some difficulties, and the Sermon on the Side of the Mountain that Jesus gave does give us hope that these struggles can take us to a better place spiritually.
La la la, la 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 la. He gives you power, no more disguise. He gives you a new way of living and new eyes. Well, I believe in the Holy Spirit, and you can be filled up with Him. If you only will accept His presence, He will give you all of Him, all of Him.
The Sermon on the Hillside begins in chapter 5 of the book of Matthew, and we're going to be reading from the Passion Translation. One day Jesus saw a vast crowd of people gathering to hear him, so he went up on the slope of a hill and sat down. Now you might wonder, why in the world did he sit down? Because that was the customary way of teaching by the rabbis at the time, and so Jesus was considered a rabbi, and he did just that. He taught when he sat down. With his followers and disciples spread over the hillside, Jesus began to teach them. What happiness comes to you when you feel your spiritual poverty, for yours is the realm of heaven's kingdom. Joy, happiness comes from feeling spiritually impoverished? That seems strange. It sounds even stranger if you think of literal impoverishment. But happiness can come because you don't have things weighing you down. What delight comes to you when you wait upon the Lord, for you will find what you long for. I don't like to wait. Not many people do. But it is a delight to wait when we wait for God's timing, for His direction, for doing things when He wants them done. It always works out better that way. What blessing comes to you when gentleness lives in you? For you will inherit the earth. Gentleness. What an important word to describe Christians. And it is a blessing to be gentle, to be trustworthy, to be honored because we don't get angry and get all upset about things. Gentleness. And we will inherit the earth, the new earth. How enriched you are when you crave righteousness, for you will be satisfied. Craving righteousness means that we work towards being righteous, that we work towards doing the right thing. How blessed you are when you demonstrate tender mercy, for tender mercy will be demonstrated in you. We want to be merciful. We want to give people the opportunity of a second chance. And we are blessed when we do that. No matter what they've done, God can forgive it. We must remember that. We must keep that in mind. Tender mercy has been demonstrated to us, and so of course we need to do the same for others. What bliss you experience when your heart is pure, for then your eyes will open to see more and more of God. It was Søren Kierkegaard that said that purity of heart is to will one thing. By that, I think he meant that we should desire God above everything, that we should desire God's will above everything. And with that purity of heart, we can accomplish more for God, and we can be much more used by God. And that will open our eyes to see more and more of what God is doing, and to see more and more of God. We're more receptive to God when we have a pure heart. How joyful you are when you make peace, and then you will be recognized as a true child of God. Blessed are the peacemakers. That's the way the NIV and other versions have this. Blessed are the peacemakers. How joyful are you when you make peace. You will then be recognized as a true child of God. We are people of peace, and we should help bring peace to this strife-filled world. How enriched you are when persecuted for doing what is right, for then you experience the realm of God's kingdom. We are enriched when we are persecuted. And you say, how can that be? How can that be? Because persecution keeps us focused upon God. And it helps us to realize that He was persecuted for us. And we need to be willing to be persecuted for the world. He died for us. We need to die for the world so that the world can accept Jesus and His death and salvation for them. That's when we experience the realm of God's kingdom, because we're a part of it and we're acting like it. How blessed you are when people insult and persecute you and speak all kinds of cruel lies about you because of your love for me. We don't like insults. We don't like persecution. We don't want cruel lies. And you have probably experienced that. I know I have. And yet, God somehow takes us through all of that lying, all of that persecution, all of that insulting, because He loves us. And we are learning a little bit of what He went through on the way to the cross. The passage continues, so leap for joy, since the heavenly reward is great. Thank the Lord, hallelujah. For you are being rejected the same way the prophets were before you. We're walking on the road of the prophets, and when we're rejected, we are being like the prophets, who were almost all quite rejected by the people around them. That's the way God's people are. We are not well accepted by many. Your lives are like salt among the people. But if you, like salt, become bland, how can your saltiness be restored? Flavorless salt is good for nothing and will be thrown out and trampled on by others. Salt without saltiness. What's the point? You might as well eat sand, right? Flavorless salt is good for nothing. Your lives light up the world. For how can you hide a city that stands on a hilltop? And who would light a lamp and then hide it in an obscure place? Instead, it's placed where everyone in the house can benefit from its light. So don't hide your light. Let it shine brightly before others, so that your commendable works will shine as lights upon them. And then they will give their praise to your Father in heaven. We need to light the world. Our lives are the light for this darkened world. We are showing people a different way of living. And we don't hide that light. Why would we hide the light? Why would we try to hide a city that is on a hilltop? We need to light the lamp and then let the lamp shine forth so that people can see it and be drawn not to us, but to God. We place it in the house where it will benefit the whole house with the light. Everyone is helped. So don't hide your light. Let it shine brightly. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Well, that's just a part of Matthew 5. And as I said, the Sermon on the Mountaintop goes on for at least that many pages just for chapter 5. And then it also goes into chapters 6 and 7. I hope you'll pick up these chapters and read them today.